Finish training for the day? Time to fight post-workout fatigue with Core Power Protein Shakes. They're packed with 26 grams of high-quality protein to build muscle and electrolytes to help hydrate. The nutrition you need to help your body replenish, rebuild, and repair post-workout so you can power on to the next one. Champion your recovery with Core Power. Visit corepower.com to learn more.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
For a limited time at McDonald's, get a Big Mac Extra Value Meal for $8. That means 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun, and medium fries, and a drink. We may need to change that jingle.
Prices and participation may vary.
This episode is presented by State Farm. Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm. It's like expecting the leadership of a team captain on the football field, but getting a sea captain. You wouldn't settle for just anything for your team. Shouldn't it be the same for your insurance? So don't settle for just any insurance when you can go with a leader. State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
All right. Welcome back to another episode of Eagles Edge. And this time, it's not just going to be me journeying on for 1 hour. We actually have not one, but 2 special guests. And the first of which, you'll see at the top of the screen, is Alex Bilckle, the Director of Analytics at FTN Fantasy. And they're a charting service. So anytime you see stats about like coverage or all the stats that are hand labeled, he's the guy kind of responsible for that, behind that team. And we also have Jimbo, who Patreon members will know. He's our resident salary cap expert, probably knows the numbers better than anyone not inside the building, and a resource that I go to all the time. So I'm glad to invite you guys on the show. How are you guys doing?
I'm good. I appreciate the term expert rather than nerd, but nerd is probably more accurate. But happy to be here.
Yes, same here. Absolutely love talking football, and it's cool because, you know, for my job, like a lot of what I do is talking football, but this time I get to just talk about the Eagles, my team. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
Awesome. So as you guys are coming in here, joining the live stream, as always, throw in your questions in the chat. Now you actually have some different people who will be answering it, which will be nice. But getting into this matchup, you know, every week I'm writing a couple thousand words. I'm breaking down all the analytics. I'm watching a ton of film. But I already know what my perspective is, but I want to hear what outside perspective is. So I guess I'll ask you, Alex, like coming in this matchup, how do you view these teams overall? Like in terms of where they may rank in the league hierarchy, what are their strengths and weaknesses, and how might that play out in a matchup scenario?
To me, I think one of the biggest questions here is how does Denver defend Philly? Because we know that, you know, a lot of teams for the last couple of years really have tried to play as little man and single high as basically they possibly can against us, while also trying to stack the box, which is something I'm sure we're going to talk more about. But Denver's a really unique team because they love to play single high. They love to play man coverage. And they've even stuck to it in some matchups where other teams refuse to do it. So like last year against Cincinnati, nobody was playing single high man coverage against them. They still tried to play man coverage. Burrow threw for over 400 yards. Both Chase and Higgins went over 100. So we've seen them be really stubborn and just stick to their strength. last year it didn't make a whole lot of sense because they were also first in pass DVOA when playing too high, when playing zone. But this year they really haven't been good so far. It's a small sample, of course, but they haven't been very good in pass defense when using too high. So I kind of think that we're going to see opportunities for plays down the field that maybe we haven't really seen over the last year and a half or so for Philly.
Absolutely. And I would draw people's attention to this graph right here. And one thing I will note, there's a lot of different charting services out there. You may see different coverage tallies. And Alex, if you want to add any more color to that about like why one may say one thing and one may say another, that's fine. But regardless, they all agree that Denver's playing a lot of man coverage. And you can see these black dashed lines indicate league average. So just on a relative base, they're way above league average in cover 0, cover 1. And so a lot of people, like, it's something I wrote about in the offseason, which is the Eagles struggled against too high zone coverage passing. The reason you're not seeing that more is because they're deathly afraid of Saquon. Have teams been able to figure out a way to toe the line where they can play their cover 2, which the Eagles are facing quite a bit of cover 2 and struggling against it, but still stack the box? And it seems like they have been able to do that. So I'll bring you in here, Jimbo. Like, what's your perception about how teams are playing the Eagles, and like, are they good enough to stick to their guns and play their cover 1, play their cover 0, even though the Eagles have destroyed cover 0 this year? Or do you think they're going to try to foil the Eagles with more too high?
So first, if you don't mind, I wanted to take a little bit of like the 20,000 foot view here of with your earlier question regarding kind of like the just general vibe of these teams. And I feel like it comes down to some extent to potential, right? I feel like the Broncos are a team that are playing to their potential. They've had a couple losses, but I feel like they're generally playing well. They're getting good performance out of a lot of their players. A lot of their schemes are working well. A lot of the coaching is putting players in a good position. And I feel like the Eagles are, especially on offense, right, working in the opposite direction. And I think we probably all feel similarly there, that it feels like potential that is not being lived up to. So, I think these are two teams that are sort of experiencing this season very differently, I think, at this moment. To your point about the Eagles' ability to attack the Broncos, we'll see if the Broncos decide to stick with their plans or not. Obviously, with a player like Pat Surtain, they have the ability to lock down one half of the field. Fortunately, we have two pretty talented receiving options in Smith and Brown. So what I'd be curious to see is whether or not the Eagles are able or even willing, because I feel like sometimes it's a question of willingness, to try to take advantage of that. We'll see.
Yeah, Alex, I'd ask you, do you think they will use Surtain to shadow A.J. Brown?
Yeah, I do. I don't think it'll be exclusive. Like, he might not travel all the time, but I think particularly, I think one of the under-discussed things with this whole conversation is a lot of the time, shadow coverage, it depends on what kind of play call they have in place, right? And so if, for example, they have a single high man play call, they're much more likely to make sure that it's Surtain on A.J. Brown on that particular snap than if they're doing any other thing. And so if I were an offensive play caller, if I were a quarterback, like, that'd be one thing that I'd be watching out for. I think that's a tell that you can look for what kind of play call you're facing, is whether the guy's traveling or not. It's interesting. We have a stat over at FTN called DVOA adjusted fantasy points against, and this isn't a fantasy show, but I think it's just like a really good marker for overall production. And we have seen Denver for the second straight year. They are a really, really difficult matchup for wide receiver ones in particular. They're the third toughest so far this year. They're only like slightly neutral for wide receiver twos, and then all of the wide receivers are actually giving up more production than those guys average. So it's unfortunate because we all want to see A.J. Brown get back on track, but this is definitely a better spot for Devontae Smith and company.
Yeah, and you'll harken back to last year, and I forget who one of you brought it up, that the Bengals absolutely roasted the Broncos last year, and you mentioned how much cover one they're playing, and specifically T. Higgins had a field day on Riley Moss. Now, to the film, to me, it looks like Riley Moss is a considerably improved player this year, and the stats seem to back it up. His completion percentage against is low, much lower than it was last year. He's forcing a lot more tighter throws, and visually, it just seems like he's staying in the players' hip pockets a lot better. And we saw that very matchup play out last week where Moss did great against Higgins, forced a lot of tough plays on the sidelines that they really weren't able to convert maybe one time. So it's not a scenario where, even if I have A.J. Brown against Moss, like, yeah, that's a favorable matchup, but you're not just expecting to dominate, especially the way the Eagles have been running, where they're kind of just have this limited route tree. This is a big talking point, and maybe I want to bring you in here first, Jimbo, which is Deniz talked about on PHLY how the Eagles, this Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, if you take your top receivers, they've run the lowest percentage of crossing routes of any top receiving pair in the NFL. And I would ask you, to what extent do you think that is an issue? Why are they doing it? And do you anticipate that they'll start to diversify their route tree going forward?
I think they're going to need to. I think this comes all the way back, and maybe I'm bringing in kind of an alternative point here, but I think this comes back to some of the play designs, maybe, I don't want to say misunderstanding, I think that's a little aggressive, but not playing necessarily to Jalen Hurts' strengths. You know, we talked about it a lot with Kellen Moore last year, where you'd have backside timing routes. It was something that Shane loved to hark on every single film review that he would do. You'd have backside timing routes, you know, as if, you know, you have Justin Herbert or Joe Burrow or Pat Mahomes out there able to make those types of throws. And that's, you know, Hurts has some wonderful strengths. He's a quality player, but the ability to hit these backside timing routes is probably not his strength. And when you have additional crossers, when you have routes that are making their way, you know, from right to left, whatever, they have the opportunity to come into Jalen's field of vision. They have the ability to open up later within a progression, which can give Jalen the opportunity to find those receivers later on. But we're not doing that. And I think that is something that needs to change. Whether or not it will, I don't know. We had Kellen Moore last year here, and obviously, you know, still different coaches, different philosophies, but it doesn't seem dramatically different. And that didn't get all that much better. We still won the Super Bowl, but it didn't seem to get all that much better throughout the year. It still kind of stayed somewhat the same. You know, you had even late into the year, you know, the Eagles running Hank over and over and over again within the year. It's like, oh my God, can we stop this? So I don't know that they're going to get away from that. They should, in my opinion, but whether they will, I don't know.
So, Alex, do you think people are wearing rose-colored glasses looking back at last season? Obviously, the Eagles won the Super Bowl famously in the NFC Championship, and the Super Bowl, the passing offense was clicking, and they kind of forget how many trials and tribulations they had earlier in the season, even against teams like the Panthers. Other than some amazing highlight plays, they had some slog against the Jaguars, certainly against the Browns, running China over and over again. And I think one element was teams were running a lot of man coverage and the Eagles were dicing it. And now teams are like, maybe we're not going to run that much man unless we have 6 or 7 men blitzing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. But I also think that what we were doing better last year was we were presenting a catch-22 to opposing defenses where I almost prefer, instead of talking man versus zone, I prefer talking single high versus two high, because there's a direct kind of relationship between whether you're able to play two high coverage and whether you're able to stop the run and stack the box. And last year we saw, you know, it was like Saquon and Derrick Henry were in this consistent race for the rushing title and all this stuff. But Derrick Henry faced a stack box 52% of the time. Saquon faced it like 36% of the time last year. That's a crazy low stacked box rate for somebody running as well as Saquon was running. And the reason was because teams didn't want to stack the box against us. They wanted to have that second safety deep, because the biggest adjustment we saw to the way the Eagles were covered between 2022 and the first half of 2023, and then the second half of 2023 and last year, was they just flat out refused to give us single high looks because A.J. Brown was killing everybody every single time they got those looks. And so I think the biggest difference this year is we're not presenting that catch-22. We're making it easier for teams to either play too high or stack the box with our formations and how predictable our formations are with our run versus pass split. I'm sure you guys have kind of harped on that before, but I mean, we're 80% either pass or run based on whether we're in a shotgun or we are under center or in the pistol. And so basically, like, a team can see what formation we're in, and if they need to, they just bring that second safety down, stack the box. So I think, to me, like, that's the biggest issue. We're not presenting teams with the catch-22 that they've had to deal with for the last 3 years.
And they hear this. The coaches hear this in the press conferences. I'm sure they hear it in media in general. So clearly they're aware of it. But the question is, why are they choosing to have those tendencies? One famous quote from last year is, you can't have tendency breakers unless you have tendencies. So I guess I'll ask you, Jimbo, to what extent do you think it's part of some master plan as you get into these more high leverage games later in the season where they go, gotcha, and now we're actually passing out of condensed 12 and 13 and we're running out of shotgun spread?
I'd like to hope that that's a master plan. I honestly don't think it is. I think, this isn't baseball, right? With 162 games. This isn't, we don't have a eternity long season. These games all count. These games all matter. And they've been close so far. We're 4-0, and that's wonderful. This team could easily be far worse than 4-0 on any of these weeks. And, it would be really cool if we were, secretly having this master plan. But I think winning each game is too important to believe that, the team is secretly holding themselves back. I'm sure there's some of it that goes on. You don't play all of your cards right out of the gate. But to think that the entire scheme is being secretly handcuffed right now, only to wait to unleash it later on, is, I think, a little optimistic. I think we're just having some struggles getting organized. I think it's early in the year. I think we played very little in the preseason. I think we typically have pretty low intensity training camps. And I think this year we're a little unfortunate to have the bye week be week 9. We had an early bye week last year, and especially for the defense, we saw the impact that bye week had. Now, obviously, this time we're talking offense a little bit, so it might be a little different, but we don't have a bye week until week 9. So I don't know that the coaches are going to have a big opportunity to, like, hey, let's make some wholesale changes, because they're busy getting ready for this week.
Yeah, and every week I put out these comprehensive matchup previews, and part of it is the stat sheet at the top. I'll bring in Alex here. So, you'll see all these EPA per play, sack rates, success rates allowed, so on and so forth. And my question to you, as our resident data expert, is how many weeks should we wait until we start to value what we're seeing? Maybe you did it against a bunch of crummy teams. Maybe you only faced juggernauts. Maybe you were injured. So there's so many confounding variables that may skew what you're looking at. At what point can I be like, okay, there's some signal here?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think the first thing I'll say is we have DVOA over at FTN, which is so helpful because by far, the hardest thing with EPA at this point in the season is it's telling you more about who they've played than how they actually are. Or at least it's telling you way too much of who they've played than how they actually are to really take much signal. So DVOA, which is defense adjusted value over average, is really helping to kind of alleviate that big issue. But even then, there's, of course, a sample size issue. It's only 4 weeks. And quite frankly, like an entire season's worth of NFL is still a small sample if we're talking data-wise. Like we never, ever, ever get to a point with football data that we get to with NBA or MLB or even PGA, which is one of my favorites to model. So that's always an issue with football. I think one of the things that I like to look at it, and I think it immediately has signal, instead of looking at like raw numbers and how good or how bad, I think we can learn about team identity. So for example, like when looking at a defense, what is their style of defense? What is their explosive play rate allowed versus their success rate allowed? Because you see a lot of defenses who will say, you know what, we're going to sit back. We're going to give you those 6-yard receptions, those 4-yard runs, and we're going to bet that you can't do it for an entire drive to score a touchdown. And then you get other defenses that say, no, we want to create turnovers. We want to get sacks. We want to create, pass deflections by playing tight coverage, but they are susceptible to that big play. And so I think that's what I like to look at this time of the year, where I don't feel like I'm just, falling into a small sample trap.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds like, if you're looking at stats that describe the tendencies of a team, that has more signal early on. To extrapolate that, for example, we could look at neutral down run pass rate. Now, of course, if you're behind by 20, you're going to be passing. So that's not perfect. Shotgun percentage. We can see here the Eagles are 6th in the league in shotgun. It would be a reasonable bet to say the Eagles are going to finish top 8 in the league in shotgun percentage, and we're only 4 games in. So obviously some stats are stickier than others. Coverage is an interesting one because I think that can sometimes stay the same, but sometimes modulate because a defensive coordinator might get to the bye week, like week 7, week 8, and be like, man, we can't play cover 3. And that just falls off a cliff. And then they might start majoring in some other coverage. So I think everything needs context. I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, the other thing I'd say there is, number one, I think like personnel will change things, of course. So take Chicago, for example. With Jalen Johnson healthy, they clearly want to play a lot of man. They played a ton of man in week 1. Now their whole secondary is hurt, including Jalen Johnson, their star corner. So they've barely played man since, and they stink either way. So like that's another thing to look at is if a team is playing a lot of a certain type of coverage or a certain type of shell, and they're doing that a lot worse than the other type of coverage that they can play, well, there's a much better chance that they're going to shift over than if they're playing something a ton because it's clearly their most effective type of coverage. And then I think just like a broad way to think about what stats matter this year at this point in the year versus which don't. The stats that matter are the ones that show intent. So another one there is like if a team is stacking the box a ton and they still can't stop the run, that's a much bigger weakness than a team that is not stacking the box. They are allowing some rushing success, but when they stack the box, they're really good at defending the run. So when they play a team where the key is actually to stop the run and not stop the pass, they're going to be able to do that. And so I think anytime you're looking at stats, ask, does this say anything about intent? And if it does, it's going to matter.
All right. Jimbo, you got something?
If you don't mind, I wanted to jump in to kind of highlight like 2 different points that I thought Alex made that I thought tie in really nicely with something that I want to build on a little bit. Alex earlier mentioned the predictability of the Eagles offense. And then in addition to that, talked about how small of a sample size we currently have. And I think there's a little bit of like chicken and the egg kind of going on here regarding the offensive line. I think the Eagles offensive line is currently in a bit of a struggle, and it's debatable, again, this sort of chicken and the egg situation of like, well, are they being put in a reasonable spot to succeed when the defense seemingly knows what's coming almost every play just based on our predictability, or are they actually just struggling to perform well? And something that jumps out to me that could make an interesting issue for this game. Obviously, health has been an issue, right? We have Lane Johnson that's been hurt multiple times throughout the year. Landon Dickerson's been nursing injuries. Even Cam Jurgens is coming off of an off-season back injury. So there's some health concerns there as well. But something that jumped out to me is we see this opportunity with the man coverage rate that the Broncos have, right? And we kind of think like, oh, maybe this is our chance. Maybe we can take these downfield shots. Obviously, Pat Surtain might have something to say about that. But maybe we can take these downfield shots. But I don't know. I'm a little nervous that we can protect in order to do so. The Eagles have allowed 40 pressures on 130 passing snaps this year. That's 24th, at least as far as what I was able to dig up. That's 24th in the NFL. And in addition, I found Jonathan Cooper has been charted with the fastest get off in the entire NFL, 0.69 seconds as his average get off. Nick Benito having the second fastest get off in the entire NFL. We're about to face both of them with a potentially struggling offensive line and hoping that we can take some downfield man shots. I'm a little concerned of whether or not Jalen will have the time to do so.
I will offer one silver lining to those pressure numbers for us. We have allowed a number of pressures. I don't think it's as much an offensive line struggle as it is a route concept struggle, because Jalen Hurts also has the highest average time to pressure. So yeah, pressure is eventually getting there, but it's getting there late because we're doing a decent enough job of protecting. It's that Hurts doesn't have anywhere to throw the ball. And so if we are running more aggressive downfield routes, like that could actually help us in a strange way lower the pressure rate, because ideally that means we're running route concepts that aren't so predictable and bringing like three guys to the exact same area where it's three receivers and four defenders in like a 10-yard radius where there's just no chance of finding an open guy.
The only problem is that the Eagles, let's see, their sack rate is also 21st in the league. So granted, they are being blitzed more than anyone. So it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to tease out if it's the way they're being played versus how their own failures. But that's a great point, Alex. Like, really, the thing to be looking at is what % of the time are they quick pressures? And I'm not privy to those stats. But just
it's hard.
Yeah.
It's a hard one to look at because a lot of the time the quick pressures only happen when, the defense sends 6 and you only have 5 protecting. And it's like, it's the whole point of the offensive play for the quarterback to say, all right, you're going to leave this guy as a free rusher and I'm just going to get rid of the ball before he gets there. It counts as a quick pressure, even if you perfectly execute the play and, convert on a 3rd and 8, a 12-yard slant or something like that. So quick pressure rate is a really hard one because that one doesn't tell you intent. So it's a lot harder to take too much signal from it.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times analytics will get a bad rap because the people who are digesting it aren't properly contextualizing it, or perhaps the person who's conveying it is not doing that job. And that's a problem. I think it's always important to say what are the drawbacks or how long does it take for a stat to stabilize, or add context like why is the stat the way it is. In that regard, the Eagles are 6th in the league in rushing EPA per play. And everyone will go and say, Saquon has 3 yards per carry. Their run game's atrocious. How is that possible? And when you look at it, it's almost entirely buoyed by Jalen Hurts scrambles. So I get this question I hit with Alex is, should we have a separate scrambling EPA stat and completely remove it from rushing? And if we did that, where do you think the Eagles would rank in pure rushing?
Well, let me just answer the question, because using Stats Hub, I can just, instead of looking at the Eagles, I can just look at Saquon Barkley. So Saquon is at negative 6.7 EPA and negative 0.09 EPA per attempt, which puts him, including quarterbacks, at 54th. So not great.
And just to give context, when a lot of people, when we say EPA, it doesn't really mean anything to them. But you can just think about this. As you move closer to the end zone, your chances of scoring goes higher. So rather than just measuring that binary event of, we got a touchdown plus 6 points, you're marginally moving in the direction, and you could count that as essentially points, fractional points that eventually materialize if you do score. And what you just said about Saquon is you're losing points every time you hand it off to him. I mean, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, it's not quite as bad as it sounds, because we've gotten to a point in the league where passing is so much more efficient that, to be completely honest, like, most runs are losing plays. You just have to do it a certain amount. It's still very much debated in the analytics space of like how much you have to do it, and certainly it seems like teams have adjusted over the last few years where they're not doing it as often. Although now, ironically, we're also getting to a point where teams are playing so much more too high that running is more effective than it was 5 years ago. But yeah, it's let me see where he was last year.
Yeah, another thing I would say is the variance. So if you're the better team, like if you have a better defense, you're better overall, it makes sense just strategically that you want to reduce the amount of randomness in the game. So that's less possessions. That's not risking turnovers. And yeah, maybe you're giving up efficiency because you're eschewing some pass plays in favor of runs when other teams may be passing it. But that's still worthwhile. Have you been able to reconcile that? And now I'll let you answer the first question as well.
Yeah, so last year, Saquon was third among running backs in EPA per play, 20th overall if you include quarterbacks. And I think, to your point, like it's why we also use success rate, because the gap in EPA per play, or the gap in EPA on any given play, is going to be so much wider on a pass. So as you said, like if you're the heavy favorite, you want to run to decrease the amount of variance. We can look at success rate, and success rate is much, much closer when running versus passing. And for anyone who's not familiar with success rate, a successful play is defined as a play that improves your odds of getting a first down on the series. So I believe it's like 4 yards on first down. You have to get to 3rd and 3 or something like that after that, things of that nature. So basically, did that play help you convert a first down on the series or not? If it did, it's a successful play. If it didn't, it's not a successful play. And that's why we like to use both success rate and EPA. And honestly, I think DVOA does a phenomenal job of kind of combining the key parts of both. And
real quick tangent here. I think there was this narrative when the Eagles signed Saquon that, wow, I can't believe how he paid a running back. I want to bring Jimbo in here. I can't believe how he paid a linebacker. But when you go and you look at how much is that cap allocation, Jimbo, I'll ask you, like, really, how much did they devote to Saquon? Was it really as big of a allocation as people made it seem like?
Well, I think, there's always going to be the question of, cash versus cap. Ultimately, is it a pretty big allocation for a running back? Obviously, like compared to the rest of the league, it is. But it's managed in a way that preserves a window, right? That's how he's famous kicking the can, right? Of preserving this window at these low cap hits in order to take advantage. And I think it really just comes down to, a philosophical decision of, does it make sense if you are, the New York Jets to pay an enormous amount, sorry, Jets fans, an enormous amount of money to a running back? Probably not. We got to see Saquon as a giant. Was he the difference maker that, was able to push them into the playoffs and win, 10 plus games every year? No. But if you have a cast around, if you have a successful organization, a successful team, can a high caliber running back be the thing that kind of puts you over the edge? Potentially. It certainly did. It's always impossible to prove a negative, so we can't know whether or not the Eagles would have won the Super Bowl last year with a different running back. It's impossible to ever know those sorts of things. But it certainly just worked out well. We signed Saquon Barkley. We paid money to him. We won a Super Bowl. I know that's kind of reducing it as far as simplicity goes. But, I think some would say, like, you never pay a running back like that. It will ruin your chances to win the Super Bowl. And yet here we are. And obviously his performance was extraordinary throughout the year. So I think he certainly does take up a larger amount of cap than most teams would be willing to stomach. And there are some that would even debate whether or not it's worth it. But Howie is certainly doing it in the situation when I think it makes the most sense. And he's doing it with the strategy, the can kicking strategy that capitalizes on his strengths the most.
Alex?
Yeah, I agree with all that. I'll also take things a step further and say I think a lot of people have gone on to now say, okay, well, maybe we weren't right that running backs don't matter. Maybe it's that they only matter when everything else is in place. I think Howie was ahead of the curve on that and basically saw the way defenses were suddenly playing against Philly with those two high safeties, with this idea that we're not going to give those single high looks to A.J. Brown. And the response was, okay, well, if that's how we're going to be played, we need someone to help us actually take advantage of that and counter that in an aggressive way. And Saquon was that answer. And so, again, putting those opponents in that catch-22 situation, that was actually an analytically sound move in my mind because of the way it countered how we were being defended.
I would challenge that a bit because remember, they tried to sign Swift first and he ended up taking more money in Chicago. And at that point, now that's where I would agree with you, where they kind of had this decision where they go, do we pay Zach Moss $3.5 million or do we give the big bucks to Saquon? And it's still only 2.5% of the cap. And they're like, screw it. Not only are we going to stick it to the Giants, but we're going to get this super talented running back who, and the thing, when they signed him, I obviously never expected him to be as good as he ended up being. But the thing I did highlight was they were very predictable when they would kind of change their personnel in previous seasons when they, here comes Gainwell. Well, then, they're not going to keep DeAndre Swift in for pass protection. And that became predictable to some degree. And then when you have Saquon, he can play in short yardage. He can play on passing downs. He can run inside, outside. You never know what's coming. Now, ironically, this year, you do know what's coming for no particular reason. And I think what will happen is eventually the Eagles will get bullied out of being predictable. But before we get too lost in the sauce, I do want to bring it back to this Denver game. For people who are watching visually, this is from my site, NFLoasis.com, which is essentially an upgraded version of EPA that takes in opponent strength, situational leverage, and the consistency of the teams. And you shouldn't take it too seriously. Admittedly, I think until week 10, that's really when you start to see the value of it. It'll separate itself from EPA and it'll kind of tell you more descriptively how teams are playing. But I'll bring you in here, Jimbo. This isn't exactly murderer's row that the Broncos have faced. And their defense, they've had, against these better offenses, they've kind of been middle of the pack. And then they had some dominant performances against some of the league's worst offenses. Obviously, this was with Jake Browning. So using that context, how do you think that extrapolates to when they face the Eagles?
I hate to be the downer, because I'm usually rather optimistic. But I don't know that the Eagles aren't one of those poor offenses. We certainly don't have we certainly have the talent to avoid being a poor offense. I have no issues with personnel. But man, the coaching and play calling and the predictability that Alex brought up earlier is really, really handcuffing this offense from performing at its potential, which is something, I mentioned potential right at the very beginning. I think if this team is able to play up to its potential, I could see the Broncos, especially based on this charting that you've shown, having a real hard time with Philly. But if we see this kind of neutered Philadelphia Eagles offense that is not playing up to its potential, I don't know that it's going to perform all that much better than a Tennessee Titans or a Cincinnati Bengals. And I know that sounds terrible and that's sacrilegious to say, but man, I have not seen it. And I'm still a little snake bitten from 2023 when we rushed off to a 10-win start and everyone thought we were ready to conquer the world, and every one of those games was ugly, and every one of those games was being, as my dog barks in the background, sorry, every one of those games was ugly, and every one of those games was won by some silly, lucky, fortuitous event. And I'm a little nervous that we're seeing a repeat of that in different ways. It's not for the same reasons, but it certainly is another year where I don't feel like we have played up to our record at this point.
Alex, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, I think the comparisons to 2023, they're inevitable, and I think they largely make sense on the offensive side of the ball. But we've got Vic Fangio on defense. We're not gonna have the meltdown of Matt Patricia this year. So that's really nice. As far as this game goes, I'm in complete agreement offensively. Like, I don't know what to expect from this Eagles offense. It wouldn't shock me if they move the ball well and score points. It also wouldn't shock me if they look really, really bad. I am, however, pretty confident the Eagles defense is going to look very good in this game. I wrote the Denver Broncos chapter of our FTN Almanac this offseason. And one of the biggest findings there was Bo Nix was really not good against quality opponents. He just dominated the inferior opponents that they played last season. Another kind of interesting split along the same lines was he's good on first down, good on early downs when a lot of stuff was schemed for him, and he was very ineffective in obvious passing situations. So second and long, third and long. I think that both of those things bode really, really well for this Philly defense, especially if we can do a little bit better job this week of stopping the early down runs than we have. Put them in obvious passing situations, and then with Quignon out there on Courtland Sutton, I think this is going to be a really opportunistic defense this week, and I think it's going to be one where they're not moving the ball and we're making plays.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a big part of it is, to what extent is Sean Payton going to abandon the run? Because frankly, I think the Eagles' run defense is spotty. It seems so far that they've had trouble on the edges, especially. Dobbins, I think his vision's really good. Obviously, not necessarily a home run threat, but Harvey has more juice, and that's a guy, he gets outside the tackles and you maybe have problems. On your point about Bo Nix, one thing in my research I found was that they've faced essentially the league's lowest percentage if you look at cover 4 and cover 6. And the Eagles, if you look up here, they run some of the highest percentages of those coverages in the NFL. So I'm just calling cover 6 and cover 8 split coverages, and they're well above league average. So potentially Bo Nix is coming in seeing only like 2 to 4% of those coverages in past situations. We don't know, and he's been bad in those situations. Now, very small sample size. I actually should look back to last year to see if that was also the case, but they don't necessarily have the ball winners. I think Sutton is a good receiver, but if the Eagles just decided they wanted to put Quignon out there, I think he's basically taken out of the game. So on that note, Jimbo, do you have something to say? Because I was going to ask you, do you think that's what the Eagles will do? And just to the point further about Eagles defense versus Bo Nix.
So it's certainly something that jumped out to me as a possibility. I was actually going to ask you guys. The Eagles have played, I think, a maybe surprisingly high rate of cover 1 man this year, based on Fangio's typical play calling, and we faced a couple good quarterbacks. We faced Matt's, and it's still early in the year as well. We have, kind of a little bit of a rotating door at one of our corner spots. I think early in the year, Fangio tends to, at least last year as a barometer, tends to go a little bit vanilla until the players have kind of fully gotten ingrained into the system and the matching rules. I start to wonder if this becomes maybe the game where Fangio takes the reins off a little bit and, maybe moves away from a little bit more vanilla, moves away from cover 1. Maybe the cover 1 made sense against some of these good quarterbacks. And when our matching rules weren't so well defined yet, maybe this is the game where it's, hey, we got a young quarterback who struggles against some of these more intricate zone schemes. We now have enough weeks into the year that the Eagles seem to be playing. Like I think the defense over the last couple weeks has played better than in week one or two. Week one or two, it sort of felt like the defenders were still trying to get their heads around some of the scheme fits, especially at that other corner spot. So I wonder, and I would expect that this might be the game where we see a little bit more traditional Fangio, and I do think it could give the Broncos some fits. I think Nix could struggle.
Alex?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that you could have looked up how Bo Nix did against those coverages last year. He was 36 of 43 qualified quarterbacks in DVOA against cover 4 and cover 6.
So now we have a year and some change of sample size to say he struggles against those. And if you just watch how their offense is structured, it doesn't surprise me. One thing that did surprise me is it seems like they have all these screenplays and they're really wanting to get it out quick. And then you look at the time to throw distribution and Bo Nix is above average. And if anything, Jalen Hurts has this kind of peak that is with a bunch of quick throws, and then he has all the plays that he extends. You'll see on film with those play action plays. I think that's what we're seeing here. And I'd be curious if you have anything to say on this, Alex, where you're running under center play action. Maybe it's a shot play, and now you're getting in this territory, and that's pulling your average up. But they also have a lot of those West Coast quick game concepts. You think that's a fair characterization?
Yeah, and then I think both of these quarterbacks also have the instances where they are using their legs to extend the play, and the protection might have broken down, and someone like Stafford would have had to find a pass, but these guys get out of the pocket and extend it that way.
Yeah, and that's, I have a prediction, and this is just so I can clip this later. I'm convinced that Sean Payton, as he's watching the film, will be like, look at this eager rookie who's got his eyes in the backfield when he shouldn't. Andrew Makuba is who I'm talking about. We're going to get this guy on a trick play, deep shot. And you watch the Broncos almost every week, if not one, maybe two trick plays. They've had ones go through the fingertips a couple times. They could have had touchdowns. A couple times it worked. They got Sutton on a bomb. And I think they're going to target it, but I also think Fangio is keen to it. I think he annihilated Makuba in the meeting rooms, and he's going to say, watch out. They're going to run a flea flicker or a throwback, and they're going to try to go deep, and we're going to get Andrew Makuba's interception, second of the season, on a Sean Payton trick play. And
I love that.
Shout out to Johnny with his Patreon review of the Broncos. He was making a similar point of pointing out some of the creativity down the field from the Broncos. So I agree with you that I could definitely see them trying to take a few shots and take advantage of Makuba. It'll be interesting to see, like you said, how well Vic has prepared him for that.
Real quick. So I want you guys to say this, speaking to the recreational fan out there, what's one thing that they should go into this game to watch for? And I'll lead it off, because when I watch the Broncos, you'll see that Bo Nix, it's clear that has been drilled into him. And maybe he even had this good habit in college where he's really good at stepping up into the pocket. So he'll take his drop. The edge rushers will come and they're starting to bend the arc, and then boom, he's up into the pocket. Now, he does make erratic throws on the run needlessly, and that's not good. But he also avoids a lot of sacks and pressures and opens up some room, because when you do that, you're going to draw linebackers and you have the potential to throw over them. So look for the Eagles to once again cage rush like they did against Baker Mayfield. And it probably is not going to lead to sacks unless Bo Nix self-sacks himself. But you're going to have this opportunity where he's moving up kind of into this compressed pocket, and maybe he makes an errant throw. So that's my one thing. Kicking over to Alex, what do you got?
It's a good question. I think for me, we mentioned how quickly Bonito gets off the line. And one thing that I would say is we kind of just had this conversation about like what is leading to that longer time to pressure for these guys. And I think one other element of that is teams have a very different pass rush style against a Jalen Hurts than more stationary quarterbacks because they need that kind of lane discipline. And it wouldn't surprise me if when he has that like really quick get off, sometimes Jalen Hurts just says, okay, well, no one else has the time to kind of replace that. And he just goes underneath it and has like a big run that way. And if that happens, then let's also see, does Benito's get off kind of slow down a little bit, or is he using a different type of pass rush for the rest of that game? So I think that's kind of a really interesting matchup, if you will, just kind of almost trying to use that strength of Benito's against him in their defensive line.
This episode is brought to you by Nature's Bounty. Nature's Bounty believes your body is brilliant, naturally designed to thrive, inside and out. For those always looking for new ways to support your health from head to heels, Nature's Bounty has a range of over 400 vitamins and supplements born from 50 years of trust and care. Nature's Bounty. It's in your nature. Visit naturesbounty.com to learn more.
No one should have to choose between their own safety and their pets. But nearly half of domestic abuse survivors delay leaving because they can't bring their pets with them. Purina is helping to create more pet-friendly domestic violence shelters through the Purple Leash Project, so survivors and their pets can escape and heal together. Visit Purina.com/purple to learn more.
Big news. Sephora is now on Uber Eats. So if you find yourself facing a beauty emergency, like needing a last-minute gift, or you're just out of your favorite mascara, again, don't panic. We got you. Order now and get $10 off on Sephora orders of $50 or more on the Uber Eats app. Order now. Offer ends October 30th. One order per customer. Additional terms apply. See app for availability. Delivery fees may apply.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least that was the plan. Except now the Dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
Hey, this is Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast, here to help you make the most of your summer with Michelob Ultra, a superior light beer worth playing for. Play for it with the guys when you're competing to see who can sink more birdies on the golf course, because winning tastes even better with Ultra on the line. Play for Ultra. Fill your fridge with Michelob Ultra this summer. Enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2025 Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
Jimbo?
I've got 2, if you don't mind. One real one and then a silly one to follow it up. So my real one here is I would honestly be fascinated to be a fly on the wall to hear Nick Sirianni's approach and philosophy for this game. Because we have, I think, all of the outside pressure and probably inside pressure regarding the Eagles' pass game. Right. There's all of the noise out there about A.J. Brown and all of the noise out there about, the lack of passing yards from Jalen Hurts and all of this stuff. Right. And meanwhile, as we've talked about, we have this Broncos team that plays a high amount of man coverage. And to both of your points, sort of have a track record of sticking with it, even when it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, like they did against the Bengals last year. Right. Alternatively, though, you have Bo Nix, who is a young, very aggressive quarterback, prone to some mistakes. You have, Vic Fangio potentially able to roll out these coverages that the Eagles are particularly good at and that Bo Nix is particularly bad against. And we know that Nick Sirianni is pretty obsessed with the turnover battle. For some good reason. We have a total of 1 turnover, 1 giveaway in 4 games, a fumble. Meanwhile, the Broncos have 6 in 4 games, including 4 interceptions. So I would be very curious to be a fly on the wall to know whether the angel or the demon on Nick Sirianni's shoulder is louder. Is he going to try to eliminate this narrative with the offense and, finally break out of this and push the ball down the field? Or is he going to see this as yet another opportunity to sort of turtle up and play the turnover game and trust in this Eagles defense to make some plays and trust in the Eagles offense to not give the ball away and to score just enough points to come out of here with a victory? I would be fascinated to know what the approach is, and I think we might get to find out on Sunday.
What's your silly one?
My silly one, is the Eagles are obviously going to win this game because Dre Greenlaw is on IR, so he's not there to get into an argument with Big Dom and get him kicked off the field. So, come on, big time victory coming.
I like that.
I should have mentioned this. When you watch the Denver defense, what to me stood out on film is there is a big chasm of space between Alex Singleton and their safeties, especially when they're playing too high. And they're inviting you to attack that area, but it takes some time to develop those routes unless they're, directly down the seam. And that's where the Broncos pass rush can really cause problems. And the Eagles are reticent to attack that area. So, a lot of times when they've run the wrap in, so for people who are unaware, this is when they have this little influence hitch route, and then they have a guy outside of it running a deep in behind it. And this is a zone coverage beater, and it's been bottled up by most of the teams they faced so far this year because the Eagles run wrap in over and over again, and they run this crash concept over and over again, and that hasn't worked. This is actually a game where it has a chance of working. If you rewind back to the Ravens game last year, there was a drive where they kept hitting it over and over again. AJ Brown, boom, 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 a couple drives in a row. And I think they have the opportunity to do that, but they actually have to call it. And I say this every week, we're going to learn about the offensive coordinator. And then they came out firing in the first half against Tampa. I'm like, this is what we've been waiting for. And then what it seemed like to me, before we go, I'm curious to get your guys' opinion on this, which is they felt like, okay, we got this big lead. We've got this good defense. Let's just clam up, kill the clock. And then, 70-yard touchdown. 70-yard touchdown. Now we have to go. Now we're going to go back to our hitch routes to AJ, which won us the game against the Rams. Oops, they're ready for that. That's not working. Now all of a sudden you're panicking. So I'll go to Alex first. What is your take on that?
I think you nailed it 100% there. And I also want to just add, it's always cool for me when I can immediately check if something that, a film guy is seeing is borne out in the data. And sure enough, we have Denver as a top 10 defense, both on the left side of the field and on the right side of the field. And they are fourth worst in DVOA allowed to the middle of the field. So a kind of awesome observation there from you, completely confirmed in the numbers.
Jimbo?
I think building off of what Alex said, I think there's certainly an opportunity there. Whether or not the Eagles are able to attack it is another question. Now, fortunately, to your point, we seem to call the play to attack it time after time after time. Whether or not we can hit it is another question. I will say, though, that I think early on, I was a little bit of a Hurts skeptic. I think for a number of years, Hurts did have some struggles over the center of the field. He did have some struggles against the blitz, although I think a lot of that had to do with the offensive scheme having almost no checks in place to deal with it. But he had weaknesses, right? And that was okay. I wouldn't ever say I was a Hurts hater. I think it was just, is he a top 5 quarterback for a good portion of time? I didn't think so. But was he someone that we could win with and had strengths? Absolutely. This year, though, despite the offensive woes, I feel like Hurts has had a very, very strong year. I feel like he has had some impressive plays over the middle, which has generally not been a strength of his, and obviously doing an excellent job taking care of the ball. And that's something he's always generally been pretty good at. He had some fumbling woes early on, but he's never been a big interception guy. So I think if there is a time when Jalen might be able to take advantage of the center of the field weaknesses that Denver has and our propensity to attack the center of the field, even when we aren't successful at it, this might be that moment when it all kind of comes together.
Alex?
Let's hope.
Let me ask you guys this. How often do you think we have completed passes to the middle of the field this year? And who has been the main recipient?
Still not very often, I'd say. I'm trying to remember back now. I know Devontae Smith had a pretty nice one over the middle of the field. And I know Dallas Goedert, depending on how you categorize some of those seam routes, have had some nice plays over the middle. I don't know. What do you think, Eric?
I'm literally going through the Rolodex of all, because, every week I'm doing the all 22 review, and it's just amazing how few examples I can remember. And one thing I'd say is, what constitutes the middle of the field? Is that between the numbers or between the hashes?
I'd have to confirm. I don't think it's the numbers. I think it's thirds. So the left third, the right third, and the middle third, which would be a little bit outside of the numbers.
My guess, it's very strange because he missed games, but my guess would be Goddard, and the number might be insanely low.
It is Goddard. Dotson has 1 reception on 1 target, 51 yards to the middle. Devontae, 1 reception on 2 targets. A.J. Brown, 1 reception on 2 targets. Goddard, 6 receptions on 7 targets, 78 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So we have a question in the chat of is this a Goddard game? It seems like, based on what you're seeing with the weakness of Denver and what we are confirming with the DVOA allowed to the middle of the field, it seems like this is a Dallas Goddard.
Absolutely. Thanks, Abai, for the question. One thing I will note, and I didn't mention it here, this is speaking to the middle of the field defense. They have a major weakness on this defense. Like Singleton, Eagles fans will know. Now, first, let me say good things about him. I think he's the green dot wearer. He's a great communicator. He's a good leader. He puts his body on the line. He's a thumper. I think he misses tackles, but I think overall he's a fairly good tackler. But he's really slow. And he's a guy who's trying to diagnose what's happening. And you'll see a lot of times he'll be looking in the backfield and be like, oh, crap, they're not doing what I thought they were. Now I got to identify my assignment. Oh, they're over there. Now I'm going to recover, but I'm really slow and I can't recover. So this speaks to what you're saying about, is it a Goddard game? Well, if you can run play action, which for some reason the Eagles are not running play action, and then you get Goddard running behind Singleton, now I think you're cooking with gas. I don't know if, Alex, you have any stats on play action, but for some reason, the lack of zone read, RPO, and play action, to me, that's an egregious oversight by the Eagles, and I can't explain why they wouldn't be running more of it.
Honestly, it's another way that we've been predictable, right? It's not just that we're not using play action. We're not using Hurts in the designed run game, and that's allowing team that. I mean, how many times have we seen a big Barkley run or even a DeAndre Swift or Miles Sanders run because the middle linebacker and the safety were still watching Jalen Hurts go one way while he was already 10 yards downfield. So that is a big, big overlooked part in why our run game hasn't been going so far this season. And you nailed it again. We are 28th in play action rate. So I think when I say this is a Dallas Goedert game, it's not necessarily that it's going to be a Goddard game. It's if we look really good offensively, if we're doing the things we need to do to be successful, then it's a Dallas Goedert game. And if that doesn't happen, maybe we look like crap.
Jimbo?
So if you don't mind, I have a question for you that might be a little bit of a topic switch. We okay with that? Okay. So something that jumped out to me was, and again, little shout out to Johnny and some of his opponent prep on the Patreon. He did a nice video on this. The Broncos offense runs a significantly high number of 6 offensive linemen looks, right? They will come out heavy as could be. 2 tight ends, 6 offensive linemen. and a fullback they've done. 0 wide receivers occasionally, which is pretty wild. Leads me, I think, to 2 questions. One, for those who haven't seen, Nakobe Dean is out. He's out for this game. He has been ruled out. He practiced in full, but has been ruled out. Do we think we see some Jeremiah Trotter Jr. in this game? And if so, should we feel excited about that? And 2, this one jumped out to me as a little bit interesting. Adoree Jackson is healthy. Adoree Jackson is not a very good tackler, right? If the Broncos like to go heavy in these kinds of situations, we just saw a pretty good game from Keely Ringo. I think not great, not terrible. He held up. Would we want to see Keely Ringo or would we want to see Adoree Jackson in this game?
Yeah, so for me, I don't think we're going to see Trotter Jr. Because if you told me, they have a hulking 6'3", 260-pound linebacker who can come in on base, come in short yardage, I would say, yeah, because it's something that's not being discussed. As much I was extremely high on Campbell coming out. I love Campbell, but there are lots of run plays where he just completely gets thrown out of the club or shrinks down and you can't find him on tape. And that's fine. He needs to grow into his body. He needs to get better at block destruction. That's all what you expect from a rookie. No problems whatsoever. But Trotter doesn't necessarily bring that to the table. And so in that sense, you might as well just leave Campbell out there. So the second part, if it were me, I'd play Ringo because he's only going to get better with reps. Denver's a good offense to put him out there against because you have the ability to put him against this Alpha X tall guy who is really linear mover, Cortland Sutton. Like, yes, he's a good route runner for his size, but it's not like he's shifty like Shepard or Tej Johnson, and those type of guys are going to give Ringo problems on like speed cuts and so on and so forth. So you have that advantage. And then on the other side, you have the true speed guys, Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin, to test his vertical game. So you kind of get both of those flavors without facing an elite threat. And that's a good like waters for him to test and get better. Whereas what are you going to get from Adoree? The only reason you play him is if you're going to be like, all right, this is who we're rocking with because we're trying to win the Super Bowl, and that's it. So I'm curious to hear what Alex thinks.
I agree. And I would say, like, look, if Adoree was a clear step ahead and was just better the way, Slay was, then by all means, just play him and let him play as much as possible. But he doesn't seem to be that. So I would love to see Ringo at this point. Like, to me, there's still a very real chance that Ringo is actually better, and we should figure that out.
I agree. All right. So we just went over an hour, and to get out of here, I want to get each of your score predictions. But first, I have to make a confession. So for our Patreon community, I do a score prediction reluctantly because I understand how frivolous they actually are because of how, much parity there are in NFL games. But I do it anyway. And on that, I actually predicted the Broncos would win 23-20. And later in the week, I will post the matchup preview publicly and on Reddit. And because I didn't want the pitchforks out, I switched it and I had the Eagles winning 23-20. Now, for the record, my official prediction is Broncos win by 3. But let me kick it over to you, Jimbo. What is your game prediction? And maybe you don't have to zero in so much on the score, but maybe more, how will the game go? Will it be high scoring, low scoring? And who do you think has got the advantage?
Man, on my inaugural appearance, you're gonna make me you're gonna make me be a hater. So here's the thing. I mentioned earlier about like wanting to be on the wall with Nick, be a fly on the wall and see what Nick Sirianni's thinking. I think that this is going to be let's turtle up and see if Bo Nix makes some mistakes and lets us win this game. I would love that to be the case, and it very well might be the case. Either way, I think it's going to be a low-scoring game. Maybe I'll be wrong on that. That would be nice. But I think it's going to be a low-scoring game. And if I'm going to make a prediction, I'm going to predict that Bo Nix and the Broncos manage to get a few, that we hold them to a pretty low score. But I think it winds up being something like 14-10 Broncos. Which I know is that's like a gross score, but that's what I'm going to go with.
Alex?
I'm going to make Eagles fans a little happier. I'm going to say 27-13 Eagles. I think the Eagles defense is going to control this one. And I don't think it's going to be a game, even though I'm predicting 27 points. I don't think the Eagles offense is going to look very good. I think it's going to be an opportunistic defense, gives the Eagles offense some really good field position kind of throughout. And the other downside to the prediction is I think A.J. Brown's going to have another bad game. It's going to be Goddard and Devontae Smith doing most of the production through the air. And so we're going to hear the exact same conversation all week, even after another convincing win against a very good team.
Yeah. And to be clear, there's lots of pathways to victory for the Eagles. If they actually can establish a legit ground game for once, and they decide to spread out the field, I think that bodes well. If they can turn over Bo Nix, for sure that bodes well. If they don't let those pass rushers just tee off based off Eagles' tendencies, that all bodes well. And I even think there is a pathway to a convincing victory, like Alex mentioned. That would totally be within my, one standard deviation range of outcomes. But to me, there's a little bit of law of large numbers here. And I mention it. This would be the first loss in 19 attempts that Hurts starts and finishes. And, all good things come to an end. And just the way the matchup is this week, it makes sense that may happen. And if it does, the Boo Birds are going to be out. But until next time, this has been Eagles Edge. Hopefully we can get you guys back again, because I am looking for some co-hosts. I think people will enjoy this episode a lot more than just me going solo. Even though it was our first time, I think it flowed really well. So I'm super pumped about how that turned out. So thanks, guys, for joining.
Hey, thank you.
Absolutely. It was a lot of fun.
All right. Go Birds.
Go Birds.
Go Birds.